This list has nothing to do with competitive Pokemon, and it's obviously just all my opinions. I'm basically ranking the Gigantamax forms just on how much I personally like the Pokemon, which is usually mostly down to the designs. Anyway, let's get to the rankings. Sorry to all Hatterene fans, I really don't know how popular this Pokemon is. I'm not a huge fan of base Hatterene, it's just not the type of Pokemon I'm a fan of, not its actual in-game typing. This Gigantamax form really doesn't change a ton, so that unfortunate combo means it landed in last place, even though I don't outright dislike it. I'm outright not a fan of Cinderace, I personally don't like its design. Don't kill me! This Gigantamax form I do think actually makes it cooler, it's on a giant fireball. That's cool. It also changes its ears to be more like a lop-eared bunny, which I do actually like. Not enough to make me like the Pokemon overall, but oh well. I've placed both forms of Urshifu here, as the only real difference is the Pokemon's typing, but what I care about more is the design, and the design change is just, do you want red or do you want blue? The Pokemon also just don't change that much from regular Urshifu, which is a pretty nice looking Pokemon, but I do find it a little disappointing in its Gigantamax forms. I think Copperage's Gigantamax form is better in theory than it is in reality. It enhances the farm equipment aesthetic, but its trunk becomes so oversized that I actually find it hard to see anything notable on the Pokemon. I don't like Meltan or Melmetal, at least in terms of them not being catchable in the mainline games. It being in Let's Go is confusing, and it getting a Gigantamax form feels pointless. Though I guess this form was added to encourage people to play Pokemon Go, but that's not helping its case. Outside of how you get Melmetal, I think its design is fine. It really isn't a standout Pokemon, and this Gigantamax form does improve it a bit for me. It makes it look more imposing and less natural, which for this Pokemon I guess is a good thing, maybe? This whole Pokemon just confuses me. Next! Rillaboom is probably the starter in Gen 8 I like the most in its regular form. I'm not really a fan of any of them, but I think Rillaboom looks decent for the most part. I'm not a fan of its drum just kind of being a massive drum it carries around though. This Gigantamax form just goes more all out on the drum aspect, which makes sense from an evolution or form or whatever narrative standpoint, but I just don't like the drum aspect very much. At least it looks kinda cool seeing Rillaboom rocking out. Kingler's Gigantamax form kinda has the same problem I had with Copperage's Gigantamax form, where looking at it becomes kinda awkward for me. I find it a bit hard to make out what's going on with its design usually. I think this is because of the usual glow that Gigantamax Pokemon have, and how much is going on with its bubble beard. Bubble beard. This form makes Kingler based on a Japanese spider crab, and much like anything with spider in its name, I'm terrified of it. The bubble beard also makes it look like an old king, and I personally think makes it look kinda pirate-like. It's really cool. I do wish you could see the Pokemon's face properly though. It's Eevee, but fluffy. Neat. Oh god, the legs! So many legs, and more legs, and I don't like all the legs, and ugh! It's basically just being a bigger Centiskorch, but it being basic works in this case, because it being a centipede means just making it bigger and adding more of those dastardly legs enhances its concept. It's not exciting, but in terms of the more basic looking Gigantamax forms, I think this one works. Duraludon feels like its design was made after the Dynamax and Gigantamax concept was already thought of. I don't know if this is the case, but out of all of the Pokemon this generation, this is the Pokemon that feels like it was made because of the gimmick of the generation. It's a building, it becomes a skyscraper, it makes sense, continues the design's narrative, and makes it cooler as a result. Also, skyscrapers are big. I don't know if you know that already, but yeah, they are. It just makes sense all around for a Gigantamax form. Inteleon is based on spies, and more specifically James Bond, because Galar, so UK. Making it go full on sniper mode is the best thing they could have done with this Pokemon, without changing how the Pokemon itself looks too much. I do find it interesting the Gen 8 starters don't change a whole lot with their Gigantamax forms, and mostly focus on an object to enhance. Snorlax is one of those alternate forms that's just kinda funny. It's just a bigger Snorlax, but now it's got a whole grassy hill on its body. It looks like it could have wildlife living on it, generations of bugs and small rodent Pokemon living their best lives on the warm Snorlax belly. Meowth has so many alternative forms, my god! This kitty just looks like one of those photos you see of cats where someone holds it and it becomes super long and thin looking because gravity is a thing. I actually only discovered gravity fairly recently. I used to float around everywhere, and then a scientist mentioned gravity and boom! Been stuck on land ever since. Pikachu becomes chunky. Is that the word? Is that the meme? Is that the thing the kids say? I just turned 25, I'm basically on my deathbed. It basically just looks like the original Pikachu design, before Pokemon decided it couldn't have its precious mascot be fat, because they hate fat people. I hate one fat person, but can't avoid him because I see him in the mirror. Ah well, the mirror adds 50 pounds. Grimmsnarl mostly becomes lankier and its proportions more exaggerated in general. Its hair makes me uncomfortable anyway, at least I think it's hair. Kinda reminds me of tentacles, so I'm shocked I've not seen more fan art of this Pokemon that makes me want to pour bleach into my eyes. It being kinda creepy looking enhances its design for me, so I'm a pretty big fan of this Gigantamax form. Garboda's Gigantamax form actually reminds me of the Snorlax Gigantamax form a little bit, except instead of it being a place for nature to farm and thrive, this is where everything good goes to die. It takes Garboda being the rubbish Pokemon, trash Pokemon, sorry to the Americans, now being big enough to be a full-on landfill. It's a toxic wasteland where any life withers away. Milk evolves into Cream, Cream Gigantamaxes into Cake. I learnt that in food tech. I think this is a pretty dramatic change over Alcremie. Shocked the line didn't get a small cake as a third evolution, and then it becomes the huge wedding cake, tower cake style thing to enhance that. But no, Gigantamax is from cream to cake like the food tech teacher always told me. Still, narrative wise, it's a logical next step, and it being a tower cake just makes sense for a Gigantamax form because tall. Butterfree doesn't change its concept, I don't think. It becomes bigger and gets these massive glowing wings, and that does make the Pokemon all around more interesting for me to look at. I've heard some people say it looks like Mothra, but I create Pokemon videos on YouTube, so I wouldn't know about Godzilla stuff since I'm not a fucking nerd. Sandaconda was already a coiled snake, and this takes it to a new level, also making it look like a tornado of dust or sand. I guess sand makes more sense. I like Sandaconda, and I think this form just makes sense, like I already said. Dreadnought just kinda stands up. Still, it's not as little of a change as Pawmi to Pawmo. I think the only reason I like this as much as I do comes from Dreadnought being a favourite of mine from this generation. If anything, it probably looks scarier on all fours. There is something funny about a snapping turtle standing on its back legs though, and it being expected for us to take it seriously, which I guess I'll pretend to in case it knocks on my door, because its teeth are horrifying. Toxtricity is a rocker lizard. Its Gigantamax form, like a lot of these forms, seems to enhance each aspect of the existing Pokemon and make it bigger. The standout thing is the animation of the Gigantamax form smashing a guitar. This is just a cool Pokemon with a solid Gigantamax form. One of the biggest downgrades for me with Gigantamax forms from Mega Evolutions, I'm not really a fan of the glow all the Pokemon get. Corviknight is one of the only Pokemon I think the glow doesn't mess with the design. In fact, while it does make parts of the design less easy to make out, the red glow on the dark purple Pokemon is really cool. I'm a big fan of red and black as a colour combination, and apparently I seem to like dark purple and red together too. I'm a big fan of these bulky Pokemon like Nidoking, Rhydon and Aggron, and while Colossal doesn't fit into their style perfectly in my mind, I still like it for similar reasons. Gigantamax Colossal turns into a gigantic furnace. I personally would have liked it to turn into a train, but either result works in my opinion. This design makes it more kaiju-like, and it really works. The scale adds an intimidation factor, and this is another where the red glow works really well with the base Pokemon's colour. I wonder if in the Pokemon universe you get threatened with getting a roly-coly if you've been naughty all year, and your parents are just like, "Brandon, you little shit! If you misbehave again, I'm gonna get you a pet for Christmas, and not Rockruff." Lapras is one of those Pokemon that almost everyone loves. I'm not an exception. I think it's a more beautiful looking sea creature than Milotic. In its Gigantamax form, its shell becomes a cruise ship, which is just silly fun. Basic Lapras was used as the default sprite for surfing in Pokemon early on, and so this just takes it to the next level of riding it. Instead of just being on its back, you're on a cruise ship on its back. Though I guess not really, since you're not allowed to Gigantamax or Dynamax outside of gyms. Another Pokemon with a shell, but this shell upgrade is definitely superior in terms of, I don't know, coolness or intimidation factor. Its shell becomes a battle ship, but my immature ass would be tempted to let the Pokemon faint just so I could say, "You sunk my battle ship." It's not even funny, it's just a nice vocal stim for me. Going from an alien to a UFO, this is one of the most dramatic changes of all Dynamax Pokemon. It's super cool looking. I've never used Orbeetle, but this would be one of the standout reasons for me to do so. Venusaur is already a phenomenal design, and didn't really need much of a change. Its Mega didn't change a lot, just added more detail. This Gigantamax form doesn't change a lot, but the flower becomes gigantic. The overgrown flower makes this Pokemon look like it's in its bulkiest and hardest hitting form ever, and just makes it look tougher all around, whilst looking sillier than ever at the same time. If you've seen a good amount of my Pokemon videos, then you've probably heard me mention that I love the Applin line, so this doing better than any of the other Gen 8 Pokemon for Gigantamax forms shouldn't be too surprising. Both of these Gigantamax forms are in one place, because they're the same. Them being the same is disappointing, but the actual design is very good. The Gigantamax form is where the little dragon gets its chance to shine and show itself more, which was this line's main way of doing so in Gen 8. In Gen 9 we got Hydrapple, but that didn't exist yet, so this Gigantamax form stood out more since we got to see the little dragon pop out more from its apple shielding or home or armour, or whatever the apples are for it. The form also feels like Dipplin before Dipplin was a thing, since it seems to be based on a caramel or syrup apple. Machamp is one of the Pokemon you'd least want to get into a fist fight with. That said, since there's been 8 generations since it was introduced, there's been a lot more fighting types that look like they'd want to fight you, and thus Machamp becomes a little less of a standout for that. In comes this form, which makes Machamp terrifying. It looks like it could punch anything into the sun, if that thing didn't pop up on the punch's initial impact. Bulbapedia says it might be based on Ultraman, but I know nothing about that. All I know is I really like this design, and the Pokemon looks tougher than ever. Gengar is a Pokemon that the game makers clearly love. It's in most games and often gets a form or a standout appearance. Gigantamax Gengar is hard to describe. It just looks like a giant ghost that's now huge mouth, looks like it may be close to a black hole or a never-ending hole, which for the original Ghost Pokemon feels very fitting and scary. I don't know if this form is a reference to anything specific, but I do know it's just really cool, badass, and intimidating. A lot of people are probably going to hate me putting this at number 1, and I get it. Charizard is so loved by the Pokemon Company or Game Freak or whoever you want to say, and it is shoved in the audience faces a lot. I actually find it kind of frustrating myself. It's my favourite Gigantamax form. I'm someone that complains about Charizard getting too much special treatment, and then they kind of just go and make this my favourite Gigantamax form, and so kind of even more frustratingly, it's not like I can say the alternate forms are lacking in quality. I think its Megas are great too. It looks more ferocious, it's huge, and it looks like it's mastered its fire abilities when in its Gigantamax form. I think this is a phenomenal design, and Leon using it gave it time to shine in Sword and Shield, even if I wish champions used Pokemon native to their region as their ace Pokemon. But I suppose Gigantamax is exclusive to Galar, so that could potentially be a whole other video topic worth of stuff to talk about. Anyway, in the end, it's just a really badass and cool form that makes a lot of sense and adds to Charizard's seemingly ever-growing list of forms that I think are amazing. Generally speaking, I think Gigantamax forms are a step down from Mega Evolutions, which I know I've said I'm also not the biggest fan of. I guess I'm just not super into a lot of the generation-specific gimmicks. I do really like regional forms, so I'm glad they stuck around beyond one generation. The glow worsens a lot of these Gigantamax forms for me, even if it does make a couple of them cooler, and Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing only being possible in gyms means I just don't really bother using this mechanic. I'm not the biggest fan of them in-game, and in general I prefer a lot of these Pokemon in their normal forms, but some of these are very good designs. It's not even that I dislike any of these forms, I just didn't get super attached to any. It's hard to get attached when you know forms will get taken away the next gen. I know Gigantamax is very divisive anyway, Sword and Shield being super divisive probably didn't help that. I was still getting the terms Dynamax and Gigantamax mixed up when writing this script, so that probably says a lot about how much experience I have with the mechanic. Or maybe the terminology is just easy to mix up. But anyway, that's my list. Let me know your ranking or some of your favourites or least favourites in the comments. Please consider liking and subscribing to help the channel out, and until next time, bye I guess.